Part 3: Common features of Shakespeare's tragedies. The fatal flaw that Shakespeare has employed for all his tragic heroes is a good study for understanding his plays. Shakespeare's tragic heroes are all fundamentally flawed. It is this weakness that ultimately results in their downfall. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The Shakespeare tragedies often focus on the fall of a noble man. For example, Hamlet is the prince and he falls because of his tragic flaw, procrastination. Macbeth was a king and he falls because of his tragic flaw, vaulting ambition. Similarly, Othello because of jealousy and King Lear because of the pride or the arrogance. Shakespeare's heroes often fall victim to external pressures also. Fate, evil spirits, and manipulative characters all play a hand in the hero's downfall. For example, in the life of Macbeth, it is his own wife, Lady Macbeth, proves to be a manipulative influence. And in the case of Othello, it is Iago. And King Lear, it is his own, obsessive love for his name, his pride, his arrogance. That is the reason. In Shakespeare's comedies, the main protagonist generally has a flaw that leads to his downfall, as I said. And sometimes they are both internal and external struggles that contribute to their tragedy. All of Shakespeare's tragedies contain at least one or more of the following elements: a tragic hero, dichotomy of good and evil, a tragic waste, hamartia, the hero's tragic flaw, as I have mentioned in the slide, issues of fate or fortune, greed, foul revenge, supernatural elements. The supernatural elements is again a reference in Macbeth. The in the beginning, the three witches come and proclaim Macbeth as you are the Thane of Gada. That is the prophecy. Because of that supernatural element, Macbeth is influenced. And of course, there is an internal and external pressure also. The internal conflict and the external in the form of Lady Macbeth in the case of Macbeth. And of course, the paradox of life also is important aspect of the tragic heroes. The tragic flaw is the main issue of their downfall. As I said, King Lear is obsessing himself with kind of a self-love, narcissistic self-love, and because of that he fails in his life, he falls. Now there are Shakespearean heroes who play a very important role in their disguise. Some of them you will be interested in knowing. And most of the heroines play as a page girls also. Page, a kind of an errant page girls. Two gentlemen of Verona, for example, if you take as an example, Julia is in the disguise of Sebastian. Is a young noble woman from Verona. In the play, she disguises herself as a boy and follows her boyfriend Proteus to Milan, where she catches him trying to hook up with another woman. Julia is also pretty clever. In order to travel safely, she disguises herself as a boy, namely Sebastian. In those days, it was unsafe to travel from one country to another country. Therefore, she had to disguise herself as a boy. This is pretty good technique, definitely. But Julia doesn't sometimes, sound very pretty. She sounds very, very, very common to the characters. She even takes up a job as a Proteus page boy in order to follow him and closely monitor him, and then proceeds to run a painful errand, delivering a ring to Sylvia on behalf of Proteus. Why would she do this? Is she a glutton for punishment? Is she hoping to size up the competition? We are not exactly sure, but then Julia's intention is to win over the love of her lover, that is Proteus. So that is the reason why she disguises herself as a page boy. And if you take the Merchant of Venice, Merchant of Venice portrays the Lady Portia with strong quality. She creates a scheme to protect her wealth, status, power. She has become accustomed to love also. She uses trickery to get what she wants in the end, protection of her status, wealth, power, and she ends up as a true heroine. Portia conceals her intelligence to the men in the play until she has accomplished her mission. To save her husband's best friend Antonio, she disguises herself as a Balthasar, a lawyer, a famous lawyer, and her attendant also, disguises herself as men. In the court scene of Merchant of Venice, Portia is not only equal to the male characters but even more respected as she understands the law of Venice. She takes on pleasure on how her new look appears. She carefully chooses her words and misleads the Jew Shylock and win the case in the favor of Antonio. Whether she is manipulative or not, the audience should have admired her for her self-determination, intelligence, and high-spirited nature, and she still remains the heroine of A Merchant of Venice. Then if we move on to Rosalind as Ganymede in As You Like It. Well, Rosalind runs away to the forest. She knows that rape and robbery are very real possibilities on the road. So she decides to disguise herself as a young man named Ganymede. Even though Rosalind identifies her hidden fear with being a woman, she also seems to recognize that masculinity cannot be imitated or faked. That's another important issue. A twelfth night. Twelfth night opens with the appearance of Viola being cast ashore, Illyria, and thus loses her twin brother Sebastian. Having nothing to do and nobody to visit, Viola disguises as a man to protect herself in the foreign country, while keeping both eyes and ears for information about her brother. She then works as a page for the Duke of Illyria, Orsino. Viola plays almost the entire part of the play in male costume. She temporarily changes her name to Cesario, but soon becomes Orsino's favorite. She is trusted to send the Duke's love letters to Olivia, the beautiful maid in the country. Shakespeare turns the plot in such a way that Olivia loves Cesario instead of Orsino. Cesario steals Olivia's heart in only a single visit. She seems to mock at Orsino of how to win a woman's heart, but she herself is in love with the Duke. Therefore, the play runs with mistaken identity and misunderstanding among the leading characters because of the disguise, and it gives a comical effect to the audience. Basically, this type of disguise device was used by Shakespeare in those days in the in the absence of female characters who forwarded to act out those characters. Naturally, Shakespeare had to depend on men to act out those women characters. Therefore, he could have devised this particular device so that for a man doesn't have to appear in the disguise of a woman. For example, if a man were to act out as Viola. Uh, he doesn't have to appear as a woman. Now, Viola herself is disguising herself as a man. So, a man could have acted simply like a man in the name of Viola. That is the technique Shakespeare could have employed in those days. In the absence of female characters forward volunteering to act such a female characters. Cymbeline, of course. Imogen is another important character who appears in disguise. After her brothers were abducted from the nursery as infants, Imogen became Cymbeline's sole heir. To consolidate power, he wants her to marry his stepson, Cloten, but headstrong Imogen is unwilling to be an instrument of her father's personal political machinations. She follows her own conscience, evidenced in her marrying the suitor of her choice, the low-born but wealthy Posthumus. Imogen wanted to marry Posthumus, whereas Cymbeline the king wanted Imogen to marry Cloten, and that is why she had to go out in a disguise of a boy and woo Posthumus, finally win his hand in the marriage. The name with which Imogen appears in the play is Fidele, 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 Fidele. Okay. If you want a little more information, you may read the play, Cymbeline, and understand the storyline. This is something that Shakespeare employed as a dramatic technique in order to manage the absence and involuntary nature of women to come forward to act out the female characters.